Hello, welcome back. This video is for radiologic technology students to learn the radiographic positioning and criteria of the axiolateral mandible. So I have pictures of two different types of positioning that we can do for the axiolateral mandible. In this first position, we have a patient with their face and head in a true lateral position with the IPL perpendicular to the IR. In this positioning, we would need to use a 25-degree cephalad angle on the tube. And we're going to be projecting this mandible superiorly so that we can leave this mandible that's closest to the IR free of superimposition, because the mandible on the IR is the mandible of interest. Down here, this position's slightly different. The patient, instead of being in, if you notice where the shoulders are placed, the patient's shoulders are placed here. This patient is in a slight, and their body is in a slight anterior oblique, whereas the part of interest is in a true lateral. In this position down here, the patient's head is still in a lateral position, but the body is placed in more of a posterior oblique. They're trying to take this shoulder, the patient's right shoulder, out of the way. All right, so this is a positioning that we can do for patients who have larger shoulders, where we see that the shadow of the shoulder is covering the shadow of their mandible on our collimated field on the IR. So what we can do is place them in this type of position and then slightly tilt the head away from the IR. So the vertex of the head is going to be touching, not the vertex, but the vertex is going to be tilted toward the IR. The chin and mandible slightly away from the IR. I would say you really don't want to do this any more than 10 to 15 degrees away from the IR, or you will end up with foreshortening of the mandible itself. But they're going to tilt the head away, or the chin and mandible away from the IR. And that way they don't need to use a full 25-degree cephalad angle. They can change the angle of the tube so that they're only angling, say, 15 degrees cephalad, and that will, so that way we won't have the shoulder being projected into the image. So that's just another way to do the positioning. As far as the boards are concerned, and our radiography textbooks, they are going to focus on the lateral position with the IPL being perpendicular to the IR and a full 25-degree cephalad angle on the tube. I just like to show my students this positioning because clinically a lot of the time we will adapt to the patient and the condition and change our positioning to a slight tilt on the head and less angle on the tube. Now, let's look at the images and discuss some criteria, some radiographic criteria for the images, all right? So what we want to see is the downside mandible, meaning the mandible that's closest to the IR, and we want to see it completely without any superimposition. So the first thing I look for is that coronoid, to make sure that that coronoid is clearly demonstrated without superimposition of the opposite side of the mandible. So this opaque line that we're seeing here is actually the opposite side of the mandible that's been projected up and superiorly to push it out of the way. And so we left the other side, the side of interest that's on the IR, down where it should be. All right, so here we have the coronoid free of superimposition of the opposite side of the mandible. So now I know that we had sufficient angulation on the tube. Then I'll go over to the condyle, check out the condyle, make sure that the ramus and the gonion are free of superimposition of the spine. That will tell me that they ask the patient to fully extend their chin, extend their neck to clear that superimposition from the C-spine. Then we'll go to the body and look for the body, look to make sure that the body is not foreshortened. If there's foreshortening of the body, it could mean that they did not have the patient in that true lateral position, or that, in the case of whether they rotated the patient to place the body of the mandible closer to the IR. In those cases with a general survey, we would do a 10 to 15 degree rotation of the head to place the body of the mandible against the IR. And if that body were foreshortened, that would mean that we need to rotate the head a little bit more to make sure that that body of the mandible is lying against the IR parallel with the IR. So that's something to look for. So the coronoid to the mandibular notch, around to the condyle, down the ramus. Check out that gonion, free of superimposition of the spine. Body of the mandible all the way to the mentum. And then I kind of go to the mentum to find that opposite side and follow it up to make sure that it's clearing that coronoid, so to know that that coronoid is not superimposed. So now let's go over and look at picture B, our image B. All right, so I can see that there is definitely not as much distance between the body of this mandible and the opposite mandible compared to picture A. So on picture B, we can follow that opposite side from the mentum here, follow that opposite side, see that opaque line there, and you can see it coming around. There's that beautiful gonion, but it's superimposing the coronoid. Here's a little coronoid trying to peek through that gonion. All right, so I can see right away that we need to angle more cephalad for this image. So this would be an example of insufficient angulation on the tube. Now let's look at picture C. So I see that the coronoid is free of superimposition by the gonion, so it can go back to the mentum here and see that opaque line. That's the opposite side of the mandible. All right, and then I can follow it all the way up that gonion, and I can see that coronoid down here completely free of superimposition of the opposite side. So that's great. That means that they used a good angulation on the tube. They had that cephalad angulation to clear that superimposition, but at the same time, I'm coming over here to the mandible of interest, following from the gonion up the ramus and the condyle, and I see that this C-spine is superimposing a lot of that anatomy that we want to see. So this would be an example of insufficient extension of the neck. So the C-spine is still superimposed on the anatomy of interest. I hope that this was helpful. Thank you for watching.